could I ask you to take your seats? That can be adjusted. My friends, if I can ask you to take your seats, please.
The URJ. URJ, actually.
Thank you. Thank you. My friends, very warm welcome to Temple Beth Israel this evening. My name is Rebecca Silk and I have the honour of being the President here at TBI. I welcome you very warmly to this wonderful event that we're about to enjoy with the UIA and the Union for Progressive Judaism. And welcome to everyone who's watching online. Thank you to those who have come out and we're very pleased that so many of you are also watching online through TBI TV. I would like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional owners of this land, the people of the Kulin Nation, their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their custodianship of the land on which we're meeting today. It's now my very great pleasure to introduce to you Hayley Southwick, who's very well known to so many of us. Hayley chaired the Women's Division of the United Israel Appeal Victoria for 10 years and since 2017 has been the President of the UIA Victoria. Hayley has brought energy, vitality and renewal to the UIA. Please make her very welcome.
Hi everyone. Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, as was just mentioned, my name is Hayley Southwick and I'm the President of UIA Victoria. I'm delighted to address you all here this evening in this very special year of celebrating Keren Hayesod UIA's centennial. Tonight, I would like to briefly outline our organisation's 100 years of achievements. 100 years ago, Keren Hayesod UIA embarked on a mission at the World Zionist Conference in London. We had a clear vision to support and facilitate the needs of the highest national priorities of the Jewish people in line with the vision of the Zionist movement. This mission galvanised the Jews of the diaspora who, driven by their concern for the future of their people, gave generously of their money, their time and energy to this new organisation. Yet, the challenge of creating a sovereign state out of nothing and the sheer scope of this venture was really quite overwhelming. Keren Hayesod UIA brought and resettled hundreds of thousands of impoverished immigrants and created physical, social and educational infrastructures for the state on the way. We helped to set up the education system, the banking system, El Al Airlines, Zimlines, the electric company, and many other institutions that became the backbone of Israeli society. After the establishment of Israel in 1948, we built hundreds of border settlements and development towns. There was barely an aspect of Israeli life that we haven't been involved in. And our unique place was further acknowledged with the passing of the 1956 Keren Hayesod law in the Knesset, recognising us as a national organisation and the official fundraising arm representing Israel. And here we are today, 100 years later. Having brought 3.5 million Olim home and facilitated their meaningful integration so that Israel today is once again the spiritual, cultural, and population centre of the Jewish people. The inventiveness and creativity that characterises this young country has made it a global leader in security, agriculture, science, technology, medicine, and many more fields. All these achievements were made possible with the help of Keren Hayesod UAA donors, serving as a bridge linking world Jewry and the State of Israel. The same perseverance and passion that fired the early settlers and our founders continues to propel our worldwide family. A Jewish state is no longer a dream, but a vibrant, flourishing reality. Yet, immense challenges remain. In Israel, youth at risk, impoverished Holocaust survivors, the elderly, and immigrants are in desperate need of our assistance. Furthermore, a sustained campaign of terror and attacks on our borders continue to undermine our national safety. Keren Hayesod UAA's revolutionary-driven, outcome-driven projects focused on supporting these vulnerable populations inspire me every day. And to ensure that the money is going to where it is needed, I often visit these projects in Israel. I can personally attest to having spoken to people who benefit, and it is both heartwarming and validating to see the direct impact of our community's support. It is often these vulnerable populations that are overshadowed by the vast development and success generated out of Israel. It is both these achievements and challenges which make up the complexity of Israeli society. And it is for these reasons that a national institution like Keren Hayesod UAA not only exists and is vital, but thrives in ensuring that the people of Israel are supported. So where do we go from here? It is our turn to shoulder the responsibility to safeguard the future of the Jewish state and Jewish people worldwide. We must bequeath our children and our grandchildren the gift of belonging to something greater than themselves, the security of being part of a family that connects them to their past and links them to their future. For the past century, Keren Hayesod UAA donors have demonstrated that Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Lazeh. All of Israel is responsible, one for the other. It's no mere slogan, but an axiom that reflects their unconditional love for the Jewish people and the Jewish homeland. And with this in mind, it is very important to understand and highlight the great relationship that the Progressive Community Appeal shares with the UAA, which aids the direction of funds raised by the local community here for progressive projects in Israel. Funds are sent through the UAA, with a percentage retained for the core projects of the UAA. These core projects embody the same strong Zionistic values of the progressive community and supports projects such as Aliyah and absorption and youth at risk. In this room, further reinforced by UAA Australia, support is enabled from our progressive community to those causes that specifically speak to your social and moral conscience and allow you to give in a material way in a manner that you are comfortable. With thanks to you all, this spirit will continue to inform the worldwide Keren Hayesod UAA family for the next 100 years as we continue to address contemporary challenges and strengthen the State of Israel as a haven of safety for Jews the world over and for all religious streams. And as the world once again bears witness to a resurgence of anti-Semitism, we must remember our insurance policy, Israel. And with any insurance policy, we must continue to invest in it, ensuring its strength and vitality. And if not us, who will? I thank you all for supporting the people of Israel and emulating the values of Keren Hayesod UAA. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Look, mine's a very brief introduction. I'm not here to give you a CV. That's going to be done by our esteemed rabbi here. I'm here on behalf of my co-president, David Knoll, on behalf of UPJ. We just wanted to welcome you all to the function this evening. We hope you're going to have a lot of fun, ask a lot of questions. I can say that I'm one of the unofficial Uber drivers for Rabbi Saperstein over the last 2 or 3 days, and during that time we've got to know each other reasonably well. I probably got to know him a lot better than he's got to know me, because I've already sat through a couple of his extremely informative discussions, and as a matter of fact, on the way back from the university today, I said, look, Rabbi, I think you're so passionate in the cause that you're doing, maybe we could swap roles. You could actually go into the clothing industry and become a suit salesman, and I could become a rabbi. The answer was, I got a laugh, but I never got a response on the reverse side. So I'll just continue as a retired suit salesman. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is call up both Rabbi Saperstein and Rabbi Lazarow to the bimah, and the folks enjoy the evening. Thank you very much indeed.
So welcome, as I turn this on, welcome David up onto the bimah area TVI. You should be able to in 1 second as I welcome you up onto the bimah area TVI. It's a real privilege to have you here with us. I have been a great not going to turn on my own microphone, Michelle. You know, that should help if I just do that. So worried about camera angles, I didn't turn on a microphone. What I was saying, you might want to turn me down then, I might be a little loud. A real privilege to have you here on this bimah. Very much of a privilege to have you here in Australia, particularly at this time where all of us would acutely appreciate how nice it would be to be close to home. And we know that you still have some travels, all being well ahead of you before you get home, but we hope that it will be a continued safe and healthy journey. In introducing you to this community, both those that are here with us in the sanctuary here at Temple Beth Israel and those that are joining us, I have to say that one doesn't know necessarily where to begin when one looks at the achievements, accomplishments and contributions you've made to the legal world, to the Jewish world, to the moral world, to the rabbinate, and particularly to progressive Judaism. So I'll begin with the way that you introduced yourself to my daughter on Monday night. She came to Shul on Purim with her only costume being a little badge that said, Rabbi's daughter. That's what she came dressed up as. And you looked at her and said, that's a fabulous costume. I would wear a similar one. Not daughter, Rabbi's son. And I think that's might be where your journey began. But you certainly, through your studies, through your training in the rabbinate, through your work as an attorney, your 40 years in the leadership of the Religious Action Center in Washington, and the extraordinary work that the RAC has and continues to do. I don't know whether the office of President of the World Union for Progressive Judaism is greater than that of Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, but the extraordinary work that you've done in those spaces. I think your resume, your CV, speaks to so much of what you've done and who you are. And I just want to say what a privilege on behalf of this congregation, as one of the rabbis of this congregation, to have you here with us in our community, and particularly on this bimah.
Well, I reciprocate. This is a great community. This is a great congregation. You've got a great rabbi, and I am really delighted and honored to have the opportunity to talk with those of you who are in the room, and we're online also.
We are.
So for those of you who are watching online here, it is really a joy to have the opportunity to share ideas with you at this extraordinary moment in our history.
And so just by way of explanation in terms of the structure of the conversation we're looking to have this evening, It is promoted as a conversation, and we very much wanted to be that. Rabbi Saperstein asked me if I would be comfortable receiving questions and not just asking them myself. I nervously agreed, but to do it in three parts. To begin with a focus on the notion of faith and the place of faith in the modern world. To then look a little, as so many of us are, in unpacking some of the challenges with fanaticism and fundamentalism in our changing world. And then to get onto something which both of us are passionate about, which is a conversation about the Jewish future and where it is that we might and hopefully will be going. So to begin that, I'll start to use the Australian idiom by bowling to you underarm. To what extent do you think your Judaism has shaped your values?
First of all, any cricket analogy here already has me lost. It is, I found myself incapable over the years to fully understand the rules of this
you recognize it as a
remarkable
cricket
sport.
analogy at least.
Here, so what role does Judaism play? Look, like all of you, the values that have been central to my life have come to me from many different sources. What I learned at school, what I learned in the various academic studies that I've enjoyed, what I've learned in the reading that I have, what I've learned watching the world and learning about the world, watching the news. I hear all of this is part of who we are, but I think I speak for each and every person here if I say that part of the values that have shaped my life I learned around the Seder table, learning of freedom and the journey from slavery, oppression and persecution to a promised land that offered hope, freedom, safety and opportunity for the Jewish people. I learned in lighting the Hanukkah menorah of the right to determine our religious lives against those who would take away that freedom, who would impose a foreign culture on us. I learned in every Shabbat what a day of peace meant. I learned in my father's sermons, the rabbi's sermons, in the stories that I learned in religious school. I learned in our youth group programs a whole set of values. I learned in the history of the Jewish people what it meant to be the quintessential victims of persecution, of ethnic cleansing, forced time and again to flee countries, to be banished from areas, from countries, from communities, seeking only safety and the opportunity to live open with opportunity and freedom. And when we had that in Babylonia, in Alexandria, in the golden age of Spain, even before the age of reason, our communities flourished and we contributed so much to the world around us. All of this taught me the lessons that have shaped my life and have been woven together into a holistic whole from the other sources that we have. I know each of you could tell of how values like that out of your own Jewish experience is part of what inspires you and helps shape your values, your priorities in the world. So for me, put that together with the example of my parents and my brother, who all three of whom are for me my heroes, and it is and their lives bound up so deeply with the Jewish community. Here, you can't separate out one part of influences in our lives from others, but interwoven into all of it is what to me it means to be a Jew and to respond to God's call for us to be a holy people.
That's interesting, the language you used at the end there, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you directly was, do you feel called? Do you feel that there is divine providence guiding and shaping not just you, but your work?
Well, let me answer both of those questions. I do feel called in the way I think every Jew is called, not something specific or different to me about it. Here, so on that level, I don't feel anything special in that regard. I respond in terms of my faith ideas, my own sense of theology. I resonate deeply with the strand of Jewish theology that would argue that when God created the universe, God chose to leave one part of creation undone. And that was the creation of a world of justice and peace. And then God gave to humanity something different, all of humankind, not just the Jewish people, all of humankind, that, as far as we know, unknown anywhere else in creation, the ability to understand the difference between right and wrong, good and evil, the blessing and the curse, and the capacity and responsibility to choose between them. And then God entrusted to us in our sacred texts a blueprint to how to complete that world of justice and peace. And in calling us to be God's partners, in that call, you shall be holy as the eternal your God is holy, a message to every Jewish person. In the call for us to be an Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations, God did something extraordinary. In the words of the great Orthodox Jewish scholar Isidore Twersky, long the head of Jewish Studies program in Harvard University, part of the legendary Soloveitchik-Twersky family, he said, in calling us to be partners with God in completing creation, God has ennobled humanity, raised us above mere biological existence, and given to our lives meaning and destiny and purpose. One cannot claim to be a God-intoxicated Jew, said Twersky, without having a passion for social justice. I have seen that as a central mission I have chosen to respond to in the Jewish tradition. Not the only mission, the mission to work on behalf of the Jewish people, to ensure Jewish continuity, to enhance Israel's ability to flourish as a Jewish state here, to be a good citizen of the nation of which I am a part, to bring the values and the messages of our tradition to the world. It's all part of the mission I've chosen to live my life out as a Jew. But that central idea of God's call that I think every Jew in their own way hears has been the central faith statement of my life, Rabbi, in a way that has always inspired and guided me, and I think has done so for the Jewish people in a way that has allowed the Jewish people to help shape a better future for all humankind.
And the way in which you've done it is singular and has been singular through the 20th and 21st century. But I want to ask a pretty direct question. How do you keep going back to pursuing that call? At what point, how do you stop yourself from hitting the red button instead of the green button? When you see these challenges coming at these situations in the world and saying, enough, like, I'm just one person.
I never struggled with that. I'm not sure I could explain why. I've never really struggled with that. It's always been self-evident to me as I've watched the people I've most admired around me, that none of us are capable of doing everything. And the argument that we can't do everything should never stop us from doing anything. Here, each of us chooses what we're going to do. It can range from just being a kind parent, a thoughtful brother or sister, a loving child. It ranges from the little deeds of goodness that we do to make the world better for the people around us. Whatever your political views, liberal or conservative, if you're animated by trying to make the world a better place, trying to have special care for the weak and the vulnerable who need your help, to trying to take responsibility for the future of the Jewish people, trying to ensure that the next generation will have the wonderful benefits we've had, and perhaps even more so because of the legacy we've done, then you're doing your part, however you choose to do it. Here, many of you in the serving professions, many of you in causes that you give donations to, many of you in things you volunteer for. You all do it in your own way. But every piece of that makes the world a better place. Every piece of that is living your life as a Jew. So many of us do those things, and we may not think about it like, well, this is a Jewish thing to do, because non-Jews can be doing the same thing. But the studies show that Jews who so disproportionately are involved in every cause for social justice, in every serving profession, way out of proportion to our numbers, when you probe why they do it, so many of you feel that you're living out your Jewish values in doing that here, and it is existentially fulfilling to you as a Jew and a human being, both merged together in doing that. So I really have never felt kind of overwhelmed sometime, and sometimes just keep plugging away at the things that it's possible to do. And the blessing of my life is that somebody decided to pay me a salary to do what I would love to do more than anything in the world. And just so you understand, because it wasn't fully explained, although I think most people know, here, the Religious Action Center is the social justice arm of the Reformed Jewish movement. It is the public policy arm. So both the person who leads the effort to develop social justice programs in local congregations, our 900 Reformed congregations. I think you all know that in the United States, the Reformed Jewish movement is far and away the largest stream in the Jewish community. As large as the Orthodox, Conservative, and Reconstructionist streams combined. But no matter what stream you're in, according to the study, social justice is a central part of the expression of Jewish values and Jewish identity. So I was blessed to do that as kind of the lobbyist to the government on behalf of the Reformed Jewish community, in the interlocutor with our local congregations, our lay leaders, our rabbis, training them to be more effective and efficient in doing social justice work. So somebody paid me to do what I love doing more than anything else in the world. Here, how can you ask for anything more? Yeah.
Frequently people do, but I appreciate the sentiment. So let's before we leave this faith part of our conversation, let's spend a little bit more time in Washington, seeing you don't only call it home, but it's the base of where you've done most of your work through the RAC and the advocacy roles and the work that you've done in being on the boards and executives of so many significant organisations committing to social change and social improvement. How does faith work in politics?
So, politicians are really good at answering the question they want to answer regardless of the question that's asked.
Some say that of rabbis too.
Well, I'm about to do that. Yeah. I'm actually going to answer a completely different question or make a different point. And I promise to get back to faith and politics about it. But what I was saying before when I said how much I love this is my father was, I had two great-grandparents who were Orthodox rabbis. Very prominent Orthodox rabbis. I had a great uncle who was a Reform rabbi. My father was a Reform rabbi. My uncle, his brother, was a Reform rabbi. My father served one congregation for 50 years. Right person, right time, right place. Absolutely beloved. Here, he came to a congregation of 60 families. He retired. 50 years later, a congregation of 1,000 families. Here. It was an extraordinary time to grow up. And my brother is a Reform rabbi, but an academic, one of the great Jewish historians of this generation, who served as the president of the Leo Beck College in London that trains many of the non-North American rabbis here. So when I talk about being, and my mother was a leader of all kinds of civic and women's organizations in the 1950s and civil rights organizations in the 1950s and 60s. So when I talked about pride in my parents, I was really serious. But I want to say something about a congregational rabbi and watching my father, and think about the congregational rabbis that you've known here in this congregation, or whatever congregations you're affiliated with, those who are watching online, or you who have been members in different congregations over your lifetime. The role of a congregational clergy person is absolutely unique in the world. Think about it. Think about it for a second. There's no other job in the world that allows one human being to engage as fully as others will allow them to engage, from birth to death, in good times and in bad times, as that of a congregational clergy person. And when you have rabbis, like the rabbis in this community, who have the ability to shape and nurture and support people who officiate, if they're like my dad, in life cycle ceremonies, sometimes 5 generations in one family. Here, the numbers of people who went on to be leaders of congregations, lay leaders, and Jewish professionals and rabbis out of that congregation, the number of people who is Jewishly inspired, there's nothing quite like it. So I'm extraordinarily proud of my own career, but I have such respect for you, for what you've dedicated your life to, for the other rabbis here in this community who serve congregations here. And that has been for 2,000 years the backbone of what Jewish life is about. The synagogue, you know, every Jewish organization can make use of good, committed Jews. Synagogues are distinctly capable of creating them here, and the rabbis and their leadership have made all the difference here. So I never forget that, and I never forget, I'm so proud to be the president of the World Union, watching new emerging congregations that we're supporting in 50 countries across the globe now, and watching us replicate what's been achieved in Australia, in the United States, in Israel, in the growth of reform liberal communities, progressive communities across the globe. And I just needed you were talking about here, my role in terms of this. I just wanted to reciprocate in terms of my appreciation.
I appreciate that, and I thank you for it, but I'm going to not let go of the question.
Faith and politics. You know, first, the United States is a little different, I think, than Australia. We're a more religious country. One of the reasons, there are many sources of why that happens. The history of America in terms of the number of people who came fleeing religious persecution. You know, the United States and Israel, although Australia has a little bit of this, but the United States and Israel are distinct in the number of people who conscientiously left countries, often facing oppression and persecution in those countries and hopelessness in those countries, to go to help build up a land and live a life of purpose and opportunity. That's what Israel is. It's an extraordinary thing. Far more than any other nation on earth, people chose to go to build up the land. Everything that you talked about so eloquently of that building of the land was done by people who chose to go there or chose to support those who went there. That's what this is all about. When you make contributions to the UPJ through the UIA that comes to the World Union, supports our efforts to make Israel the kind of country most capable of welcoming new immigrants to that country, that helps build the Zionist camps that we run now. We have 3,000 kids in our camps all across the world here, 17 camps just in the former Soviet Union. And these are the Zionist thread of those camps. It's helping to produce people to go to Israel here. We're all in this together, and those people go to choose a life of purpose here. Well, America was like that back in the 1700s and the 1800s, of people who are fleeing persecution, and then for Jews in the late 1800s and the 1900s here, for, you know, those who fled the Pale of Settlement, those who fled Eastern Europe, here, those who fled Germany and all of Europe in the years leading up from 1933 until 1940, when it became so difficult to flee those areas. And then afterwards, for survivors that went either to Israel or to so many to Australia, the United States. Here, all of that's part of what the United States is here. But we did something different than anyone else. Because we were such a diverse country, we came to an understanding early on, and there had been so much oppression because of the linkage of church and state. We separated church and state. We separated church and state, and there are conservative evangelicals who argue that that separation of church and state is anti-God or anti-religion. Nothing could be further from the truth. That wall separating church and state has kept government out of religion and allowed religion to flourish with a diversity and strength. More people going regularly to worship, more people believing in God, more people holding religious values central to their lives than any other democracy on earth other than India that matches us in this regard. And it's been a blessing because we're the most religiously diverse country in the world. There are, according to the sociologists, there are 2,000 religious denomination, different groups, sects, all across the United States. And for those of you who've been to the United States, I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right. 1,900 of the 2,000 are in California. Nonetheless, this extraordinary country has had a degree of religious tolerance, religious comity, with all of the problems that we have here, and that has been something really extraordinary. Interfaith relations flourishing all across the globe today here, but really had a home in the United States early on, in which we felt we were all in it together, and it was kind of a civil religious tradition that linked us all together here. So that's infused our politics. People talk about religion here. They bring religious values into conversations here. I actually was writing a book before President Obama asked me to serve as the U.S. ambassador for religious freedom, called "The Use and Abuse of Religion in American Elections." Here, it was called "Racing with God: The Use and Abuse of Religion in American Elections." Here, there's a right way to use religion in our public discourse and our political discourse in ways that are not divisive, in ways that are not trying to use politics and as a means to create coercive laws that will infringe on people's religious freedom and liberty. And there are ways that religious language can help inspire people even of different religions and bring us together. Here, we've done pretty well in the United States on this. The last 40 years, 30 years, we've seen, particularly from right-wing groups in the country, efforts to politicize religion and weaponize religion.
I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there in a second.
Challenge to us.
I'm going to go there in a second to look at this changing nature of right and left and fundamentalism or fanaticism. But before we leave faith, a direct question. Is the world better with believers in it? The studies done by sociologists on a global level and pollsters on a global level like Pew and Gallup and others that have studied this tell us that 80% of the population of the world, 80% of the 7+ billion people in the world are believers, identify with a religion or a spiritual questing here in a way that, in a form that we think of as religion. Religion has done extraordinary things in education, humanity, and providing health care. There are large parts of sub-Saharan Africa where a significant proportion of the healthcare provided comes from religious entities that are serving communities. The ability of religion to bring meaning to people's lives, help them organize their understanding of their role in society and the universe is central and inspirational. At the same time, you all know that religion can be used for evil. Here, those who arrogate to themselves the one truth and believe it so deeply that they're willing to use force to impose their views on others has been a source of brutality and oppression and persecution throughout the history of the world, and Jews have been the quintessential victims of that persecution. We see it today. There is not a single religious group that doesn't have extremists
who in the name of God will assassinate a head of state, who in the name of God will attack innocent civilians who differ, in the name of God will capture young girls in Nigeria and rape them and force them to marry and force them to convert, or what happened to the Yazidi women in Iraq, who in the name of religion, militant Buddhism, will ethnically cleanse 1 million Rohingya Muslims and force them out of the land that they've lived in for generations. Here, or in the name of a secular ideology, will try to culturally destroy Soviet Jewry or Uyghur Muslims or Tibetan Buddhists. Here, we know terrible things done in the name of values that are either religious or play the role of religion where there is no religion here. And, you know, I truly believe the best of religion can defeat the worst of religion. And I've dedicated my life to that purpose. Here, let me ask the question of you, though, that I asked, you know, I talked about American faith. How does faith work in politics here? I really don't know that much on this question. But how would you assess the role of faith in the politics of Australia?
I think the history lesson you very rightfully gave us in the distinctions with the way that the United States were formed and the analogy you drew in terms of the way that the state of Israel was formed makes a very clear distinction to Australian society and to the waves of migration and the nature of those migrations. And so I think that there is there isn't the same comfort with terms of using religious language. We find in our communities that whilst people might want to talk about their spirituality or their interest in spiritualism, that the comfort with that language is just not there because it's not something that they've necessarily had modelled for them or in their homes and in their families if they weren't congregational in whatever congregation or organised religion that is. And I think that that's a clear distinguishing point. But then also, because of the rise and nature of parochial school education here, the way that religious institutions, religious denominations, religious sects have influenced and shaped education to the other side of the coin in the way that public school education in America is part of the civil religion, I think has created this two worlds of those that know from it, exposed to it, and those that don't. And one of the challenges I find in Australian society is that those two worlds don't always have the language, the skill, or the context in which to dialogue with each other. And so seldom find their place around the same table.
Compared to 25 years ago, is there the same use or lack of use of religion in public policy discourse and political discourse that politicians will use in making arguments or running for office? Is it exactly what it was then? Is there more? Is there less?
I think that people in the room here would have different perspectives on that depending on their approach or their position in partisan politics. I think that there are certain parties and certain politicians that are more comfortable leaning on their faith. I had an extraordinary experience with our Prime Minister soon after his promotion to the office, prior to his election to the office, where he spoke to a collection of rabbis about his faith and the way in which it guides his work and keeps him up at night and gets him up in the morning, the two different motivations. And to be honest, I had never heard an elected leader speak with that sort of religious clarity. And I looked around the room. We had a diverse group of rabbis representing the rabbinate here in Victoria. And I saw colleagues who are religiously and socially to the right of me, enthused, uplifted and inspired. And I left a little uncomfortable because it wasn't something I was used to. Not necessarily I was uncomfortable with what he said. I'm incredibly comfortable with people talking so clearly about their faith and their motivation. But I hadn't heard it in that context before, at least not in this cultural context.
Fascinating, very helpful, thanks.
It was challenging for me. So when we talk about these right and this left, this fanaticism, what we've spoken about and described as these echo chambers that we're increasingly living in, where we go to school, or we live with or belong to the same church as people who think like us or agree with us. We get to select our Facebook friends and find ourselves nodding as we scroll through because all of the things in our social media feed seem to be aligned to us, because there's some company in Cupertino that's designing algorithms challenging what information we get. We live in a very different world to that which many of us grew up in. And I'm wondering whether you find that world to be an attractive, enticing one, or whether you find that world where we have these increasingly dominant camps developing being a scary one.
Yeah, I've been here for a couple of weeks before I began on the speaking part of the responsibilities I have at the World Union and working with UPJ in terms of the efforts to strengthen the work that you are doing here. Here, my wife, who's with me, today is her last day. She broke away to spend a day. It was a beautiful day. Went down the ocean road, down to the 12 Apostles, and stopped at 3 beaches along the way to have it, and did not make it back. She would be a really fascinating person. I talked about how proud I am of my family I grew up with, my immediate family. The same is true with my wife and my 2 boys. But my wife is an award-winning journalist. If any of you have spent time in the United States, you're probably familiar with the equivalent to the BBC or the ABC called National Public Radio. Ellen was, for many years, the executive producer of the flagship show, All Things Considered, and ended her 30-year career at NPR at the as the senior vice president running all the news shows of the network, and now is the vice president of it, running a big piece of a for-profit news corporation in the United States. She's really interesting on this, on the changes that have happened, the kind of compartmentalizing of the echo chamber, the narrowing. You and I talked earlier about the broadcast kind of experience many of us my age had growing up, watching network news shows that the whole country watched and talked in broad terms, as opposed to today, the very fragmented way in which the echo chamber of what we believe in, we can just continue to hear over and over again in different ways without ever exposing ourselves to different views and differing perspectives on things, and what that's done to the news media. I hear how reporting happens, the 24-hour cycle, forcing the repetition of things, because you can't produce new news 24 hours a day. So you see the same things over and over and over again, thereby not just hearing a narrow view, but hearing it repetitively in ways that reinforce it. So I'm sorry that she isn't here to comment on that as well. But I think that this is a fundamental change in that technology has wrought. Here, the technology of cable television, of digital access, of what we see on our phones. Here, this is something very different. And a lot depends on the individual person. I suspect most of you are the kind of people who actually do expose yourself to differing viewpoints, who are interested in hearing different perspectives, who really do want to understand people who are different than you. There are others who just want to have their views validated here, and that has led to political fragmentation in a number of democracies across the globe, and even non-democracies here, that has made partisan politics more intensive, more vicious, more divisive. Here, it has spurred, it's led to a decline in the comedy of our discourse, lowering the coarsening the civic discourse in our countries. You may not feel it here as much as we do in the United States. Very frankly, whatever your views are of President Trump, the fact that he himself engages in that coarse discourse here, in that accusatory discourse and that demeaning discourse, gives a stamp of approval that intensifies these patterns. There may be things the president has done that I like here, in particular in terms of Israel. Every president that I have seen basically has been a passionate supporter of Israel in my lifetime here, of both parties, and have done extraordinary things to help Israel here. But in terms of this question, I think this presidency is absolutely unique in the 20th century and 21st century. In the 19th century, we had other manifestations of this. And in the founding era, you look at the race between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, the second and third president of the United States, when they were in it was horrible what they would say about each other. Here. But the 20th and 21st century were different until this president. And this is really, I think, a very, very alarming trend here. And they're extremists who are using violence, who feel the president's messaging is a stamp of approval for what they do. I truly believe the president is appalled by that and thinks it's an unfair accusation to make about him. But that clearly is the case. He's cited by some of those who have engaged in hate crimes and violent attacks on houses of worship and minority groups here. And this is really a troubling thing. I don't know how you change it. I don't know, you've opened a Pandora's box in this regard, that it's not clear to me what it will take to restore civility, to restore the openness to listen, to restore respect for people who differ from you in American political life. Again, I don't know enough about Australia to know.
It's not just about American political life. I don't want to make the assumption that you've had the time today to read this week's edition of the Australian Jewish News. But there was a letter to the editor commenting about your visit here to Australia today, and within that questioned your overt partisan politics and whether it was appropriate to have someone who has such perceived overt partisanship coming and being part of roof body communal organisations like this, and that perhaps we should separate politics and religion, and we should separate Israel and diaspora Jews, and we should separate and compartmentalize all these different parts of our life.
I haven't read the letter, but that doesn't sound to me to be an example of what I'm talking about. Good people can differ on those issues. I don't know the tone of the letter, the language used in the letter here. You can honestly have a difference of opinion. I will tell you with here, I think you would hear this from almost anyone who knows my work in the United States. We were known for our connections across the political spectrum. Here, I mean, when my vote, when the vote was taken to confirm me in the United States Senate, and I don't know what names mean anything to you, if you think of the Republicans running for election against Trump at that time, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, well, every one of those people voted for me in that because of the long relations I had with the Republican Party here, and people in the Republican Party here. And then beginning in the 1990s, I began to put together strange bedfellow coalitions involving the Catholic bishops, the Reformed Jewish movement, and right-wing evangelical groups. Here, we did some extraordinary things together. We wrote an important, I know you were dealing with this here, an important religious freedom bill domestically in the United States. We wrote the Sudan Peace Act together that led to the appointment of John Danforth and the the peace pact that was signed between South and North Sudan in the 90s. We wrote the Human Trafficking Act that created an office of the Human Trafficking Office at the State Department in the annual report. Here and there were people criticized me for working with evangelicals, right-wing evangelicals whose views were somewhat anathema to this. And I said, if we can find common ground together, that's how you change people. Here, by working together and engaging with each other and working together. So I was supported by almost all of the major evangelical, conservative evangelical figures when I was appointed as the U.S. ambassador about it. So it's kind of ironic to hear this, but you know, so long as the language is respectful, I welcome people to take me on and criticize me and to say whatever they want. That's how we learn, and I've found in trying to justify my positions when people offer thoughtful criticism, I actually have either sharpened my ability to explain my position or actually rethought positions in ways that have changed my own views on things. So
that's based upon civil discourse.
Yep. Yeah.
And do you think that civil discourse is becoming harder?
Yes.
In the climate
for all the reasons that I was saying before, I think it's becoming far harder. I mean, is it true here too, or you don't feel it the same way that we feel it? You do.
And so the question is, you know, so much of the success that you've achieved, you are very quick when people talk to you about the success that you individually or the organisations you've been part of and led have achieved. You often, in the very next sentence, say it's because of coalitions, it's because of partnerships, it's because of relationships, it's because of finding common ground. You've also said that that's clearly becoming a lot harder, and you're nowhere near as optimistic about the ability to do that in the future as it was in the past. So, what way forward? Well,
actually, there's still a lot that goes on. It just doesn't make the newspapers in the same way. It's, the high-profile issues are the ones that tend to be the most divisive. But there are efforts to find common ground, even in the United States Congress. There are bills that are getting passed all the time here, even in the divisive atmosphere that we have now. So it is possible to do, and again, you do what you can do here, and then you hope that people come the next election will find people more willing to work together. One of the problems is that the middle has fallen out in American politics. Here in 2004, I think there were 78, what we call it, of the 200 and some odd Democrats in the House who, about 70 of them, or let's see, 2008, it would have been, 2004, it would have been 56 members of what we call the Blue Dog Democrats, conservative or moderate to conservative Democrats who were part of the Democratic Party. Here, today there may be 17. Here, the middle has fallen out. And the Republican Party, it's almost disappeared. You know, the long, liberal, often Jewish Republican presence, the Jacob Javitzes, you know, famous figures who are Jewish Republicans and moderate Republicans, the ones who every single major bill for social justice in the 20th century, was in the United States Congress was passed by a bipartisan coalition of decency on Capitol Hill. Every one of them. Here, if you're talking about the environmental laws, you're talking about women's rights laws, you're talking about abortion rights, you're talking about economic justice in the Great Society, all of them
I just want to talk about
bipartisan
coalition of decency. And we can take that as one phrase, or we can take that as three different words. Because I really question, I worry, it keeps me up at night about the notion or the possibility of there being a normalization, a growth, an expansion, a flourishing of that whole thing, that coalition of decency, which spans the religious and political spectrum. I worry about the ability to span the religious spectrum, that bipartisanship, or the political spectrum. I question, and our friends and family in Israel have returned to the ballots one more time and probably are going to go back another. Whether coalitions are actually going to be part of our future, or whether they're a romantic notion of the past. And then,
well, if they're not coalitions, you're not going to have a government in Israel here. It has to be a coalition of some kind.
Israel's perhaps not our best example of...
Here, but just 20 seconds just to finish the point. Here, that was true into the beginning of the 21st century, what I described. But then, really driven by Newt Gingrich beginning in 1994, the divisiveness in American politics led to almost every moderate Republican getting knocked off in primary elections from conservative Republicans, making the divide greater and greater between the parties. So there's far less cooperation today. It happens, but it happens on the smaller issues here. And it's a shame, because if ever we needed bipartisan cooperation to face the immense challenges that we, the human race, face now, that Australia faces, that America faces, that Israel faces, if ever we needed cooperation across political lines, it's at this moment in history when we face such, so I share your concern about there's something different now, and it is preventing us from making the kind of progress that we absolutely need to make if we're going to survive. So this is a very really central challenge for us, one of the central challenges facing humanity.
Humanity, not just Judaism.
Oh yeah, humanity. I mean, we live in an extraordinary moment in human history. Here, we're the first generation that doesn't have the ability to make the same mistakes humanity's made before and learn from them. Here, we've always had warfare, but not the kind of warfare that could blow up the world. We've always had threats to our water and our air. Some of our oldest Jewish laws dealt with protection of the water and the air, but not the kind that could alter the climate of the globe, make our air unbreathable, our water undrinkable. Here, we've always had questions of our fundamental freedoms, not one matched with the technology that can make Orwell's nightmare of 1984 the reality of the world. We've always had the question of ethically applying new technologies, but not one matched with the ability through genetic engineering, artificial intelligence to create new forms of life and alter human life itself. Here, someone's going to decide, are we going to find peaceful ways for the nations to resolve the differences and blow up the world? Are we going to clean up the environment so generations to come will have the bounty of God's creation as we have enjoyed and we are enjoying here? Or are we going to destroy it in ways that will make areas of this planet totally uninhabitable? Are we going to enhance our freedoms and diminish them? Use genetic engineering to cure birth defects or create Hitler's master race? Somebody will decide. Here. In an age in which you can do everything, what you should do, the moral question, is a central question facing humanity. And on that, I believe that Jewish people, religious communities, have something powerful and important and urgent to be heard. These are the choices we have. They're daunting choices, but you can't avoid them. Your only choice is, you're going to watch others make those decisions, or are you going to make those decisions? And I don't mean you individually, although it includes you. I mean you, us, people who share our values, because whether you're conservative or liberal, what I tell you is with absolute certainty, if we remain silent, in the vacuum of our silence will come voices across the globe that do not share our values, our vision, our hopes, our aspirations. This is an extraordinary moment in human history, so if we Jews are to be a light to the nations, it is desperately needed right now.
It's hard to follow that up. Other than to say thank you and to use that as a way of transitioning to being, even though it's not necessarily our want, to being a little bit more particularistic and looking at the Jewish question and particularly framing it within this notion of the Jewish future. And I suppose there are two parts to the same question, and I'll let you tackle them in any way that you like. What's the Jewish future you think we're going to see? And what's the Jewish future you'd like to see? Which one?
I suspect, I'll take them in order. Here. I suspect that we're basically, look, on one level, there are two kinds of Jews in the world. I don't care if you're Haredi or modern Orthodox or conservative or Reform or Reconstructionist or Ashkenazic or Sephardic, here Mignadik, Hasidic. There are two kinds of Jews in the world. Those who believe that what was written in Sinai is the Word of God, and it includes a set of commandments that we are required to live in our lives, and those who believe that our sacred texts were written by men and women, perhaps divinely inspired, struggling to understand what God called us to do. And that process of writing that text and that meta-narrative has been part of Jewish history from the first time that parts of the Bible were written down through today, and will continue in the future. I think for those of us, I respect those who are traditional Jews, who believe the traditional narrative of Jewish life. We who are liberal Jews, who fit into that second category, I think need to have the confidence to be far more assertive in arguing that our bedrock vision of Judaism is right. That this was something extraordinary, that this effort to understand what God called us to do has led to the insights that came from our sacred text and have guided the Jewish people ever since. But at the core of that is a fundamental dignity of being what it means to be created in the image of God, and a fundamental belief that God has set before us the choice that only we can make, and if God's word is to live on earth, it will be because of the choices you make. God can tell us what the choices are and what we should choose and why. Therefore choose life, that you and your children after you might live. But if God's word is to live on earth, it will be because of the choices that we make as we understand God's word and as we hear it. Each of us individually and in communities that we voluntarily form within the Jewish world. Every poll indicates that the vast majority of Jews takes that second view, what I call the liberal as opposed to the traditional view. Many of them are alienated from religion, and that's often because there is not a very strong liberal Judaism that they can choose here. It's not accessible to them. They don't know of it. They don't feel its presence there. But if you look what's happened in Israel, even with the government of Israel not accepting the actions of conservative and Reconstructionists and Reform rabbis in doing weddings and doing divorces and doing conversions here, even though it is a monopoly controlled by an increasingly Haredi segment of the community, we're growing by leaps and bounds. Here we've doubled the number of congregations in the last 10 years. To 50 congregations. We have schools, and we have informal education programs and camp programs and pre-army programs here that are attracting people left and right. Today, we're 12 years ago, or 15 years ago, the polls would have indicated that 5 or 6% of Jews identified as Reform and Conservative Jews. Today, 13%, according to the latest JPPI poll, indicates that Israelis consider themselves identified with the Reform and Conservative movement. 13% is the exact number of those who say they're Haredi Jews. We match that number now. And we are growing. They may be growing by birth rate. We're growing by attracting people in that regard. Here, so as I look to the future, here, I think we will have an Orthodox community that will span modern Orthodoxy, conservative Judaism, traditionalist conservative Judaism, modern halakhically based Judaism, going back to that difference that I talked about, over to Haredi Judaism. And I think we're going to have liberal Judaism. here. I think there'll be some kind of coalescence if you're looking 50 years down the road between mainstream conservative, reform, reconstructionist segments of the community here. I suspect that we will attract the largest number of people in the United States. It's why the reform movement is the largest. And not only is it far and away the largest, but an interesting statistic that Pew in its massive 2014 poll, it asked people, what stream did you grow up in? And what stream are you now? And we kept more people than the Orthodox did. Here, I mean, you know, this is something, it's a powerful set of ideas about it. I should say we also intermarry much at greater rate, and we assimilate at greater rates. Here, when you leave Orthodox Judaism, become a conservative Reform Jew. Here, when you leave Reform Judaism, you tend to become a secular Jew. Here, you may have your Jewish identity, but you're not involved. But of those who remain involved in the streams, we have generation to generation been growing, attracting new people all the time. And I think that's going to be indicative of what the future of the Jewish community is. Liberal progressive Judaism offers a Judaism that appeals to rationalist modern sensibilities and values and assumptions and postulates that people use to organize their lives. So I think you're going to really have these two things. The question of what I'd like to see, I think that would be fine here, so I'll stick with that.
So it was about 25 years ago that the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism began a bumper sticker and bus stop campaign, making a statement which many of us understand, but perhaps don't necessarily internalize. That there is more than one way to be a Jew. You said that in order to see that future that you would like, or that you expect, that you'd be satisfied with, it would require us to accept the authenticity of our practice and not to feel like we have to be looking over our right shoulders constantly. Do you think that liberal, non-Orthodox Jews in the diaspora have accepted in the same way, or are accepted in the same way as many Israelis are, that there is actually a diversity to authentic Jewish practice?
Yes and no. Here, I think almost every Reform Jew, if you ask them, do you think this is authentic Judaism, would say yes. But if you ask them, this is a sign of the times. This isn't just Jews. If you think about before 1970, in the 20th century, across the globe, who were the great religious figures in the world that represented kind of authentic religion? It was the Stephen S. Wises and the John Hayne Holmes and the John Courtney Murrays and Pope John the 23rd and Martin Luther King and Abraham Joshua Heschel and Jinnah of Pakistan and a whole range of Muslim leaders here who were moderates in today's terms. They were the kind of authentic, who were the others? The Almagantries, the kind of, picturesque extremists here who were not the mainstream of what authentic religion was. Somehow in the last 50 years, there has been a growing equivalency in popular media, in news reporting, that authentic religion is fundamentalist religion. Here, and I think it pervades everything. I would guess if you went into a 4th grade classroom in the average school here or the average school in the United States or in Israel, and you said, draw a picture of a Jew in a Reform school, here, I think a third of them would draw a picture of a chassid.
Certainly if you asked them to draw a picture of a rabbi.
Yes, definitely if you said to draw a picture. I don't think we make that list here of what they do.
Let alone my colleague Rabbi Ettlinger.
Yes, exactly. Here, on the other hand, here there's a generation being raised now in which the norm of women rabbis here is so natural that it's a matter of primary thought. They don't give it a second thought. It is often, the joke of kids being raised in a congregation in which women rabbis are the only rabbis they see. Are men allowed to become rabbis? Who would have thought that when in this space from the time the first woman rabbi is to 24 years, the majority of HUC students would be women. It's really something extraordinary that has happened, and
22% of my ordination class were male.
Yeah, and that's not going away. There's going to be more and more of it. It's true in the conservative movement, the assertiveness in the Orthodox community of women who want to play a central role, if not called technically rabbi, want to serve the role of rabbis, who are being educated to that, who are being accepted in modern Orthodox, and the pushback of Haredi women. Here, it's a small number here, but you're seeing very courageous Haredi women who are saying that the oppressiveness of the male domination of the aesthetics of life, there is really not authentic Judaism, and there needs to be a reinterpretation of that. Part of that is the outside influences that filter in. They may have lived in an insular world, separated from everything else for a long period of time, but the very technologies we're talking about are beginning to bring images and ideas and models and role models into their lives and consciousness and awareness that are changing things. And it's not just true in the Jewish community. It's true in evangelical Christianity. It's true in some of the groups like Mennonites and Amish and others as well. This is percolating, and women are going to be in a different place 100 years from now across the board on these issues. I don't know it'll ever be totally equal role, but it is going to be very different one way or another, and thank God, because we need it in the world if we're going to make it.
David, I've got two final questions for you. The first relates to the organisations that bring us here together this evening, whether it be the UIA and the extraordinary work that we heard Hayley speak about that they have done for the last 100 years, the Progressive Appeal that looks to continue those works in support of our values in Israel, and that connection to Israel is something that I know you know and have written about and spoken about, is something that you appreciate, that is becoming increasingly difficult for many, and particularly for our younger people, who see a dissonance between the ideals of the Jewish state and the reality of the Jewish state. And they can see that dissonance in socio-economic areas. They can see that dissonance in political spaces. They can see that in the access to education, and also obviously in the role of religion within the state. And many of them, in response to this dissonance, are turning either the sound down or turning off totally. What do you say to them?
You know the old joke about the rabbi and the wagon driver who is driving him, and the rabbi wants to switch with him and see what it's like to have a wagon driver who comes and drives the wagon into town, and everyone assumes that he's the driver and the rabbi is there. So they ask the rabbi a tough question. Here, sitting in the back, the rabbi says, the wagon driver sitting in the back, they think the rabbi has no idea, and says, "Oh, that's such an easy question. Even my driver can answer the question." So even my driver can answer that question. Here, I'd love to hear your thought on the same question.
I would appreciate the opportunity to drive you on many occasions, but in terms of this question, I think first we have to begin with honesty, and we have to begin with understanding that language is changing and evolving, and language that 5 or 10 years ago we would have been uncomfortable hearing, referring to things like the occupation. We have to understand that this is language that many in our community, not just people who are opposed to us are becoming increasingly comfortable with in talking about Israel's relationship with the Palestinian people. And when we talk about the spread of fundamentalism through the world and our concerns about Islamic fundamentalism, that has been something that we've obviously been focused on for the better part of 2 decades, we need to be honest and say that there is more than a few examples of religious fundamentalism in Jewish quarters, that we've had these price tag incidents of churches and schools and olive groves being destroyed. I think we need to be honest about these things. I think we need to be honest about the fact that there is a disproportional number of young Israelis leaving to either go and study or work, and are reclaiming their parents' and grandparents' passports in order to facilitate those opportunities in the global world. At the same time, as we celebrate the fact that it is, as Haley said, our protection. It is our safeguard. It is there when we need it. And those Jewish communities, if we look at the last 3 or 4 years, particularly look at the French Jewish community, who have felt its need more acutely than others, have turned to it for the strength and comfort that it has brought. And we need to say that these things are all truths, and recognize them and encourage that people grapple with them and understand that that part of the relationship with family is to both hug and wrestle. When we look at the images that are described in Scripture, when we look at the images that hang on our stained glass windows, where we see Jacob's status changing and him becoming Yisrael, we see that clinging and that wrestling leaves its mark. It's not easy. That's what I want to say, and that's what I try my best to say. But I will also honestly say it becomes harder in a world where people change their phone every 6 months because they don't have a commitment when they, pay things by the week because they don't know if they're going to change their mind. And if that's the way they treat their possessions, and if that's the way they treat their relationships, and if that's the way they interact with each other, it becomes harder and harder to make the long play and to try and put things in context. And I'm not satisfied by that, which is why I asked you the question, and why I'd prefer to be driving the wagon rather than sitting in the back.
So I agree. What's the next question? Gary, so I really do agree with what you're saying. Let me try my language for it, because it's going to say, I think, very much the same thing, and I just want to affirm the insights that I heard you to offer here. If you see your brother or sister doing something that you truly believe is harmful to them, do you hesitate for a moment to feel a responsibility and act on a responsibility to intervene and to tell them, even if they're an adult and they're going to make the decision of what they will do, don't you feel the obligation to act and to say, you must stop this? You're doing something that is really harmful. Well, only Israelis live and die by the decision that Israel makes. We who are in diaspora do not have a right to impose decisions on Israelis. But we have an absolute responsibility if we take seriously what was said before from this pulpit, Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh, every Jew is responsible for another Jew. We have the responsibility to speak out. And we do it out of love, and we do it never losing sight of what you talked about here. Whether we are doves or we are hawks, whether we agree with Bibi Netanyahu or are sharp critics of Bibi Netanyahu, every Jew who I know who really cares at all about Israel recognizes that Israel today continues to be surrounded by forces that if they believe they could militarily destroy Israel, would not hesitate to do so. And only Israel's strength, enhanced by the support of nations, including my own nation, it remaining a Jewish democratic state that is being sharply called into question by actions that we're seeing at this point. It's hard to see how you maintain the occupation. We in the reform movement in the United States have not had any hesitancy to take that position for 30 years now, that we believe the occupation is inimical to Israel's security and well-being here, and undermines Israel as a Jewish democratic state here, and forcing it to choose either Jewish or democratic here. And we recognize it alienates people and makes it harder, but that's why we have synthesized in what our kids learn in school, in what they learn in our camps, and what they learn in our youth groups, and what they learn in our college programs that we run. We have synthesized whatever criticism we have with a broad Zionist sentiment of we being Jews, and this being the fundamental right of the Jewish people to have our historic homeland be our Jewish state here, and the responsibility we have to help protect Israel, to keep it whole, to support it. And part of that support means you try and shape it to have policies that will be more just, more equitable, more fair for all of its people, and that will lead to a peace that will be stabilize the region in this regard, rather than breeding generation after generation of frustrated, angry Palestinians who believe as deeply in their gut that they have a right to determine their destiny in the land that we share with them. And if the only option is to use force here, and there's no peace process that can offer that to them, then it is something that clearly is going to be harmful to Israel in the long run. The dilemma, of course, is that, again, Doves and Harkel, I don't believe right now there's a partner that can produce peace on the Palestinian side, and Palestinians don't believe there's a leader right now who's capable of producing peace on the Israeli side. Here, that is the central dilemma in the short run here, and it's going to take time for the political systems of those countries to work out new leadership in a way. God forbid there's a third intifada here that changes ideas. I hope for inspired leadership. It's really interesting that if you look at the former heads of the intelligence agencies, if you look at the former heads of the military, almost every one of them says a peace process, a two-state solution, is indispensable to Israel's security and well-being. So we stand here with those people, those leaders, and continue to argue for it. Here we have found, which is why we try to get as many kids to Israel as possible, that even if we show them all the complexities of Israel, the engagement with Israel, being in Israel, seeing the human face of Israelis who are fighting to create a robust, safe, secure Israel, trying to live a normal Jewish life in Israel, helps ameliorate some of the distancing that happens. And that requires us all to work more vigorously to try and get more of our young people in programs to Israel. I'm proud that the World Union does such an extraordinary job in finding leaders in the former Soviet Union, in our communities across the globe, including in here in Australia, to bring them to the seminars and programs and training programs here, and the informal educational experiences in Israel here to do that work. It really makes a difference. We couldn't do it without you. We really couldn't here. I just want to be clear, if you're not aware of it, if you're too close to the trees to see the forest here, how extraordinary the UPJ is. It does more to raise money in this campaign that this is a part of, and my being here is a part of. It does more to raise money to help support efforts to bring people to Israel, to help facilitate their coming to Israel when they come, to create Zionists across the globe and in Latin America, in our camps, in our educational programs, in our synagogues there, in the FSU where there wasn't religion before 1990. Now so many young people being attracted to liberal Judaism, to create that powerful Zionist sentiment that is so widely available here and represents who you're about. The money that you raise has helped transform things. If every region of the World Union rates proportionally what you are doing, wow, what we would be able to do in Israel are there. And at this time, that's such a challenging time to us. Here, in terms of the meltdown of the markets at this point, the fear that's out there, it is going to be tougher than ever to raise the kind of funds that are necessary. And so we turn to people like you more than ever to say, please step up and do the very best you can. But it's not my job to make the pitch specifically here. I just want you to know, on behalf of the World Union, how appreciated you are. We cite you as the great region in terms of the level of support that you're able to provide, and we've not needed that support more than at any point for obvious reasons as we do right now. So you can do that both by your gifts, but you could do that by joining ARTSA, because the votes we get in the World Zionist Congress are indispensable to the well-being of our movement. It's in your hands, and I really hope that this is a partnership between the World Union and the UPJ and the UIA here that will remain the gold standard of progressive Jewish involvement on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for that, and I'm sure many of the people that are here doing that work and part of that leadership appreciate not only the leadership that you bring to it, but the endorsement of their efforts. But I want to finish with a final question where I'm going to ask you to metaphorically remove a few of the kippot that you have put on through your personal and professional life. To take off the one that you currently sit on this bimmer as President of the World Union, to set aside the very important work you did in bringing religious coalitions through your ambassadorship, to even set aside the lifetime you spent in Washington in advocacy and policy work through the RAC, and just rabbi to rabbi. This morning, 7:30, a few blocks away, I gathered with two parents, Greg and Harriet Kaplan, who welcomed a son into this world 8 days ago, and we had his bris this morning. Noah James Kaplan, Leib Ben Avraham. If you had the opportunity to talk directly to them tonight, parents of a newborn child, their first child, young parents, what would you ask them as Jewish parents to do to ensure and safeguard our future?
Well, first, I would say to the Moyle, cut carefully. Here. Listen, the very act that they have chosen a bris is an existential statement of being part of a tradition, Shalshelet HaKabbalah, that mystical chain of tradition that binds together the generations for 3,000 years in the past, and will bind the Jewish people generation to generation, Lador Vador, for 3,000 years in the future. So I would say to them that I commend them for bringing their child into that covenant. And whether it was a boy or a girl, the different forms of bringing that child into the covenant is one of the extraordinary things of the Jewish people. Extraordinary aspects of the Jewish people. Here, I would say to any parent who's already made that existential decision, and I don't know what your Yiddishkeit is, I don't know what your Jewish knowledge is, but you're blessed to live in a generation that is the first generation in all of Jewish history, in which a Jewishly illiterate parent is comfortably able to provide a Jewishly literate home for their children. It's something extraordinary. Here, I have called in the United States for much of my career on the leaders of all streams of Judaism, to stand together to try and change the cultural norm, to insist that every Jewish child, before they go to bed, has listened to Jewish music on digitally available, has played a Jewish video game, computer game, has read a Jewish book or been read a Jewish book. Here, there is a foundation in the United States. If you don't have something like this here, it should be created.
PJ Libraries, yeah.
Say again?
PJ Libraries, yeah.
Okay, so that's the PJ Library. This is great. That does everything to ensure that regularly new Jewish forms are coming into the house, because the child's values and identity are formed by the time the child usually begins to go to religious school. Here, it's those first years are so crucial. Here that we and that I try to inculcate in every couple that I marry when I talk to them, how absolutely essential it is before a child is born to begin the practice, if they don't do it, of observing Shabbat. Here, and I give them many different models of doing it. With my own kids, I had 2 boys. You know what boys are like, right? So our rule in our house was you can't play fighting games on Shabbos. No pretend guns, no fighting games, no watching violent things. It became part of the ethos of what it meant to be Shabbat, of what it meant to be a day of peace. Everyone finds their own creative ways of doing it. I leave it to every parent, but practice that before the child's born. Practice, if you don't regularly make Shabbat, start making it so it isn't strange. And you're not going to be diverted by all of the immediate needs of a child to not get around to doing it here, and to really work on that. I go over the facts of what we know about informal education. We get a kid who goes to Jewish camp for 4 or 5 years. We know it significantly increases the chance that they will have a Jewish life. It reduces the chance of intermarriage, but if there is intermarriage, greatly enhances that the kids of that marriage will be raised Jewishly, and that it will be a Jewish household in home here. And if these are 2 Jews in married, greatly increases the chance it will be that they who came up through the camp systems, who came up through our youth groups, who came up through our schools, really makes a difference. Our religious schools are, are vital here, but you know that if you take a kid once a week or here for a few hours a week, 40 weeks a year, there's nothing magic. If you had a kid in secular school, what can you do with that? You know how hard it is when you have a kid 5 days a week. If it comes from an indifferent educational environment, a home environment that's educationally indifferent, how hard it is to overcome that in our public schools or parochial schools, etc. Helping parents understand that and what a difference it makes for them to take that leap of faith, that existential sense that this is important in the life of the family I'm creating here, and to give them the tools to do it. Have opportunities in our synagogues, if they don't know how to do it, that they'll do it. Introduction to Judaism classes shouldn't just be for converts. It should be for people who aren't comfortable in their Jewishness, who don't have the Jewish knowledge to talk about basic Jewish ideas comfortably in their home, answer questions for them. There's phenomenal resources involved. I don't just mean the intensive resources of a Melton or a Wexner or those phenomenal kinds of programs that involve, but every congregation is, the resources are out there and available online to really make a difference. So it has to be a holistic approach in which the synagogue, the rabbi, the educators, the community all get behind doing everything possible to empower parents to take that step that bris represents they want for their child here. It seems to me that this is a community that does better than others in that regard, and you should be immensely proud of that.
David, the hour is late, and so I want to take the opportunity to thank you. Ordinarily, we would go to this room to take some questions and conversations, but I think that we're going to have an opportunity after we hear from another David. Jeff, saying no to you, is there something I'm scared of?
Wait. Just, can I ask you a question? Is saying yes to you something I should be scared of?
Well, I hope not. I think everyone knows where I'm going with this. First of all, I think, Rabbi, thank you very much. You're incredibly interesting. I just want to speak of your progressive movement probably has a much greater influence in America than it does here. You've spoken about 13% and growing in Israel. You've spoken about every Jew has a responsibility to look after each other Jew. And you've spoken about the financial contribution which the progressive movement makes in Israel. Just to change channels slightly, I'm a non-practicing attorney like you are, and one of the basic tenets of democracy is the separation of powers in Israel. Sadly, I don't believe it exists anymore. I'd like to know what the world body is doing about the returning of Mal Khalifa to Israel. I mean to Australia, sorry.
Look, you can all answer that question as well as I can. Let me finish. You asked me a question. Allow me. You asked me a question. Allow me to finish.
What are you doing about it?
Are you going to allow me to finish?
Yes.
Okay. Here, let me just be clear. Here, our movement has been absolutely clear, involving not just this case, but every case across the globe, that protection of our children is a #1 priority that in every way we have to have at the center of what Jewish life is about. And that anyone who abuses children needs to be held accountable here. And in order to be held accountable, here, that may require bringing someone to stand in front of a justice system to hold people accountable. There can't be a stronger position that we have had. This is true when it is the rare case of people within our own movement who have done that. We have worked with the police authorities and the legal system to hold people fully accountable in this kind of thing, and that applies in this situation as well. I don't speak for the UPJ here, but I presume those same values are exactly the same.
I can speak to it with the clarification, which we have spoken to from Ms. Bimmer as well, and this speaks directly to what I'm about to invite one of the co-presidents of the UPJ to speak to, and the nature of what it is that we're looking to do to support those organisations which share our values and carry our values forward in Israel. And particularly, when we talk about things like the very difficulty, and when we talk about the challenges that many people in our community have with the relationship with Israel, what I've spoken about very repeatedly from this Bimmer is use the example of the Leifer case and the inability to currently bring her to justice in this country. But then at the same time, I understand that one of the leading organisations that's ensuring the continuation of the case, ensuring that it's in the forefront of both the political and news conversation, is the Israel Religious Action Centre. I know that the support, I know the support that they're giving to the families of the victims, as well as underpinning the support of the legislators that are working, the lawyers that are working in terms of the practices. And we don't necessarily get an opportunity to celebrate and laud that. But I can tell you that, yes, we're up to 65 or 67 yearing. But if it wasn't for organisations like the Religious Action Centre, the Israel Religious Action Centre, their legal advocacy work and the like, we wouldn't be continuing these hearings. There simply wouldn't be the resources to keep doing that. And that's when we say that yes, and that's the response I give to our young people. It's too easy to say this is black or white. We need to find the organisations, the agencies that share our values, that represent the future for Israel that we want, and insist that they continue to work on our behalf. And I think that we are incredibly blessed to have those agencies and those organisations, even if we aren't necessarily so happy with the effectiveness and timelines of the outcomes. And I think that's a really key piece. In inviting David to come up and say a few words, I want to thank you as well. I want to let people know that there'll be an opportunity, because we can't leave Shul without having a bit of a press, to have a conversation with you. You'll also be back here this evening, tomorrow evening, so this evening already, tomorrow evening as part of our Kabbalah Shabbat services. And I know our friends at Etz Chaim, together with Kedem and Netzer, look forward to sharing a Havdalah with you to say goodbye to Shabbat. So I think there are plenty more opportunities while you're in Melbourne.
And I think you answered the questions great. So congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. That's me trying to be affectionate while also being responsible to the world in which we live. We'll hand over to you.
This evening we gather on the land of the Yalakut Wheelam clan of the Burn Warrung people of the Greater Kulin Nation. We have pay respects to their elders and traditional custodians, past, present and emerging, who've cared for this land for thousands of years. Important thank yous. We have had a treat with our rabbis this evening. We thank Rabbi Saperstein for coming all this way. He does multiple full-time jobs simultaneously, and you've all had just a small glimpse of some of his extraordinary experience. To Rebecca Silk, our dynamic synagogue president, who every time I call her finds a way to say yes. Rabbi Lazaro and your wonderful clergy. The Progressive Appeal team, Brian, Philip, Helen, and the amazing Jocelyn Roebuck, who's not here. Without whom nothing much happens. Rabbi Lazaro said to me, well, where do you know this guy from? I'll tell you, and I won't take much of your time. Back in the 1980s, after I met my wife in the United States and decided to work for a while in Cleveland, I got involved in Soviet Jewry activity. I became what's known as a smuggler. And that human rights network was inspired by an amazing rabbi in Cleveland by the name of Arthur Lelyveld at Fairmont Temple. And like Professor Julia Stone, with whom I studied here, Rabbi Lelyveld had a penchant for bow ties. When I told him I was going to Washington, D.C., he said, you know, if you get a chance, go and listen to a young rabbi by the name of Saperstein. He runs our Religious Action Centre. I did, and I was back then inspired. Jump forward 2 decades. I became president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. I hired a new CEO by the name of Vic Alhadeff. Some of you have run into him. And I sent him as part of his training to Washington, D.C., and I told him, you should look up Rabbi Saperstein. Vic did, and Vic too was inspired. I'm sure that tonight too, you were inspired by Rabbi Saperstein's words. But as Rabbi Lazaro pointed out, Israel faces enormous challenges. And 3 years ago, I was in Israel as part of the World Union's Butel program. And a few of you have heard me tell this story as preview, but I want to tell it to those who are not there. On the first Friday, the progressive movement took us not to Machne Yehuda, but to the working class town of Ramleh. It lies between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and the shuk was busy with shoppers seeking to make their homes beautiful for Shabbat. It was also busy for shoppers buying Arab treats for the many Arab homes in town. And as we walked through the market, buying some fruits and vegetables, we turned a corner and discovered that there was a band made up of both obviously Jewish and Arab musicians, singing songs from both cultures, and people who'd put their shopping down and just danced together. That's the Israel that lives the values of her Declaration of Independence. That's the sort of human and humane Israel that our progressive values stand for. And that is why we have ultimately a UI progressive appeal. We are proud of the work we do that is funded by you. As Rabbi mentioned, Australia punches well above its weight, and not just in money terms. My very dear friend Nikki Maor, who was a Netzer leader at North Shore Temple Emmanuel, made Aliyah in 1989. She now heads the Israel Relations Centre's Legal Centre for Olim, ensuring that the Interior Ministry treats Jews who they don't want to treat as Jews. Some of her work is involved in preventing the Interior Ministry deporting the non-Jewish spouses of Jews who've made Aliyah. Young people, immigrants, Jews who want to marry other than ultra-Orthodox auspices benefit from your investment. Our work makes Israel a home for all Jews, not just some Jews. What we stand for is not just important, it's vital. The progressive appeal, by supporting Iraq and the work that Rabbi Saperstein spoke about, draws together the sparks of divinity to create a light and an energy that shines through us into the world and shapes the future of Judaism and the Jewish world. We take great pride in the accomplishments of the Jewish state, and yes, we struggle with her and we wrestle with her, and we do it with love. The UIA Progressive Appeal does not support entities that wish to tear down the House of Israel. We support amazing social justice programs and the legal work of Iraq, which those of you who were privileged to hear Orly last year know that we actually stopped the descendants of Rabbi Kahane, the racist rabbi, from even standing for the Knesset. That's work we did. We stand up, we speak out against injustice and hatred wherever it can be found. But to keep succeeding, and we are succeeding, we need your support. You are either sitting on or have placed carefully to one side an envelope. Please open that envelope. In it you will find a report that tells you about some of the work we do. In it you will find a pledge card. In it you can make a truly significant contribution to the work that Rabbi Saperstein has spoken to you so eloquently about. I am hopeful, despite the difficulties of the COVID-19 outbreak, and reflecting the enormous generosity of our community to the bushfire appeals, that we can also be generous to the work of our own values. Last year, we successfully raised $1.2 million for the UIA Progressive Appeal, up from $900,000 the year before. That was an amazing achievement. To just maintain that, because of course currency gets converted and the Australian dollar is weak, we need to raise 5% more just to break even on last year. I ask that each of you open those envelopes, complete your pledge cards. If you've given before, give careful consideration to increasing your pledge to the level that you are comfortable with and able to do. If you have not donated before, please give as generously as you are comfortable giving. This is an appeal that makes a difference in Israel. It is an appeal that generates an Israel with the values of which we can be proud. And all of your money, under the agreement we have with UIA, goes straight through to projects that reflect progressive values. Not 1 cent, apart from the 4% that we run on expenses, which is incredibly low, I have to tell you, for a fundraising organisation, gets sidetracked. So the World Union benefits, the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism's projects benefit, and the Jewish Agency had actually agreed with us last year for the first time that their allocation of money that goes through to UIA, if it's marked progressive, will only go to projects that reflect our progressive values. That is an enormous achievement. That was a reason that some of our major donors in Sydney made a huge increase last year and enabled us to cross that $1.2 million barrier. I'm hoping we have similar success in Melbourne this year, and I thank you very much for being here, and I would thank you also for telling your friends how wonderful this was and encouraging them to do likewise. Please enjoy the supper that is served at the back after you complete your pledge cards.